Well, thank you again for everybody for coming this evening. My name is Garrett Vitanza, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the principal instructor here at the Academy of Realist Art Boston. And tonight I'm going to be discussing, it is an art history talk, but I am a huge, I've independently researched art history as long as I've been trying to learn how to draw and paint. Um, and trying to figure out a way. So I always work art history into a lot of my critiques. I know many of you have probably heard me kind of mention names along the way and kind of certain works of art and such. And I've been thinking about a while of how to kind of have some sense of how to introduce art history into our regular kind of academic program. And art history is kind of like one of those some other large kind of more abstract concepts. Well, I mean, like anatomy, although anatomy is not abstract, it's very real. And I think one of the things about that makes that, I think, easier to have a dialogue about is if making things somewhat tangible. So to make things tangible, this evening we're going to be looking at a few different artists within the Renaissance movement, and we're going to be looking at their methods of construction and how we can access kind of some art historical changes, significance through looking at it as a technician. And so, here at the school, painting is a craft as well as an art form. And just like any form of craft, there's a way of construction. Hopefully I can, by the time this evening is over, I've kind of illuminated some of the methods, materials, and ways that some of the artists that we're going to be discussing went about their actual work. So I do want to be talking pretty much about the Renaissance, but before I can really talk about that, and I think that this is when, when we're talking about the Renaissance, I think a lot of people, it kind of immediate images kind of come to mind when I say the word Renaissance. So we think of Michelangelo, we think of Leonardo da Vinci, we think of Raphael, and we think a lot of good things happen then, but maybe we don't know specifically exactly what, essentially. So I think it's beneficial just to understand the state of art and painting to give the Renaissance a little bit more context and understanding why exactly it was so revolutionary and why its ripple effects are still, its aftershocks are still being felt today. So the state of art in around like the 1300s or just prior in the 1200s is pretty much this. These are basically the Byzantine iconography. So this is a representation of here, specifically the Madonna and Child. But you can see here, there's a certain naturalism, of course, like, yes, this is a person and this is I'm somewhat convinced that that's an infant. But there is something a bit different. So when painters were creating iconographies, these were also objects of worship and veneration. So their object was not to kind of cast a mirror to reality and create a sculptural space for you to go in. This was more of an image for you to pass through almost prayer-like meditation. And so their aims were different, and thus their executions were also different. There's a very sophisticated kind of canonical way in which artists and artisans would have drawn almost like formulas on how to draw faces, fabrics, certain compositions as well. And so there's a certain kind of, so the nose is incredibly narrow because this individual, she's divine. She does not need to take in air as we do. Her mouth extremely narrow. So again, she does not need kind of earthly food or any kind of sustenance. She's a divine being, so that is not necessary. And the Christ child here is basically, instead of a really convincing infant, it's like basically he took human proportions and shrunk down, essentially. Now, while this might demonstrate some kind, or might easily be construed as an exhibition of inability, this does also kind of fall in line with certain kind of complicated dogmatic ideas about the Christ child being a fully realized person. And as you'll see in some of the Renaissance paintings, the Christ child always has this basically a depressed look on his face, because this idea is that he is a well-formed enough individual that he understands what his ultimate fate is going to be in his story, and he's ruminating on that. And so again, a little bit different than the face before, but this is somewhat reminiscent of when you see different incarnations of the Buddha. They're all very similar, they all have the same nucleus, but they do have slightly different changes in costume, if you will. And so artists, although, and you can see here the Christ child is turned, looking, again, being a being of divine nature, can see and interact with these other divine beings, the angels that are there as basically to service the child. And so here, two incidents or two events from the New Testament in the Bible. On the left, we have Christ bearing the cross on his way to his crucifixion, and on the right-hand side, we have the what is called the Transfiguration, where Christ reveals his true nature to three apostles, and two prophets appear on either side of him. So you can see that these are very self-conscious images. They are very well aware that they are being watched, they are being venerated, and so everything is turned towards the viewer to be as conveniently presenting as possible. So nothing is overlapping. Everything is kind of realized as you see these figures that are kind of blown away by the ambience of the transformation happening above. There's no interweaving. They're all in their separate kind of sections of the visual space. And there is no real difference in proportion between any of the figures. So the helmets here, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 helmets, but only 1, 2, 3, 4 pairs of legs. So there's a certain sense of realism that is suspended because the aims of these paintings are not to be an illusion of three-dimensionality. These are to take you out of your common day space, to be in another world, and to help focus the mind in prayer. So the aims are slightly different. You have to remember, Europe is going through a very difficult time at this point. The Black Plague wipes out a third of the world population, known population at that point. That's the UK cut in half. Imagine COVID killing half the United Kingdom's population. So Europe is recovering, and it takes centuries for them to recover from this enormous tragedy. And aside from the tragedy of human life, the next greatest tragedy is the loss of knowledge. With that many people dying, the loss of knowledge, which is why we call this the Dark Ages, takes place. So a lot of kind of word of mouth education goes extinct. So there is this, as I was saying, a sophisticated language when it comes to Byzantium and Byzantine art, and especially when it comes to coloration. And so here are some kind of colors and what their meanings are in terms of representation. So here, gold, which is always in the background of icons. This is what a background is context. And so these individuals are in this gold gilded context. They're in the radiance of heaven, this world out of our own, this transcendent space. So there's no shadows, nothing except quite literally light reflecting back to me via the gold leaf that would have been applied. So red is associated with the divine life, blue, the human life, and white is kind of the raw creative power of God, which is why if we go back to this individual where Christ is in the midst of transformation, the power of that transformation is communicated with white, and it's solely reserved for that. In this time period, mosaics are very popular. Julius the First, I hope I'm getting that right. This is where I kind of Julius or Julian, I might be getting that wrong. Is trying to basically kind of resurrect kind of the great Rome. And of course, when we think of Rome, mosaics, decorated, palaces throughout Rome. So of course, through that revival style, that becomes very popular. So this is a really interesting, and in a way, it's a little bit of a representation of Catholicism at this time, a marriage of pagan history with a modern Christendom. And so this is a old technique, a Roman technique of mosaic, but it is a modern subject. It is Judas betraying his master, Jesus, and is going to be killed. And yeah, here he is again, or well, not Jesus, but this is Julian the First. And what's interesting about this is that, so they're all forward facing. They're all, again, very self-conscious, borderlining on decorative, and observing to us. On the right-hand side, we have members of the clergy. Maximinus is getting real notoriety. His name is branded above him on the right-hand side there. And on the left, which denoted by their purple stripe, are members of the imperial cabinet. And on the left-hand side, of course, are the military, the soldiers. So, and of course, the emperor is placed right in the middle, the center of power, the center of balance. And on his left-hand side is the arm of God, and on the right-hand side, the arm of man. So presenting him in all of his glory. Again, in a gold background, kind of highlighting, the this holy emperor. So if we take a look at some of these individuals, there is care given. These are not just kind of like in some of the icons we looked at, kind of a prescription of features that are then just subscribed. These are for individuals. They look very different from each other. But there is no sense of a light source. There is no sense of relief. There is no sense of sculptural space. So these very well could have looked like these individuals, but they are graphic and almost somewhat primitive by 21st century standards. So there is a skill set, but also almost like a restriction, almost that sorts that the kind of the belief or dogma at the time is allowing. But one of the more interesting moments I find is the bowl that he is holding. If you look at the bowl here, there is actually an attempt to render a gradient from darker to lighter. There is an ellipse being drawn. These are three-dimensional concepts. So already we're seeing kind of like the precipice of three-dimensionality and what's coming with the Renaissance starting to kind of crown, if you will, here. But for the most part, again, Byzantine icons are these extremely formulaic and venerative objects that again required a very high skill set and training in order to accomplish. Here again is a crucifixion. To me, this formulaic way of working and having a canonical way of presenting the human form in a very characteristic way, to me, reminds me very much of ancient Egypt. Now, I know that seems like a very long stretch, but there is a similarity between these two. This is also, again, a formulaic way of presenting the human figure. But if you do look carefully at Egyptian art, there are some strangenesses about it, aside from the obvious fact that it's mannered. What makes Egyptian art unique is that they are presenting you the human form with each part at its most identifiable presentation. So the head, what's the way you could tell, your mother, your father, or anybody from one glance? The profile. The profile is kind of the fingerprint of the face, if you will, in some ways. So in Egyptian iconography, the head is shown in relief to show the nose, the mouth, those defining characteristics that make this unique individual, this individual. What is the most characteristic aspect of shoulders? They're broad, so the shoulders are turned towards us. The hips, however, are turned away from us because the hips in profile are a bit more defining. They show us, well, the front and kind of can determine the sex, and they also show the back as well. But the hands, and if you notice on this individual, are both left hands, because what they're presenting is the most characteristic view of the human hand, which is to see the thumb. So if I were to present you with this view where you don't see the thumb, it can be read as awkward. So Egyptians do not show that. They show the most characteristic view at all times. And so there's a similarity with that in iconography, where there is a certain language in which reality is bent to fit that, because again, its means and its aims are different than the representational and Renaissance artists that are to come later. So just to kind of encapsulate things here, so Byzantine art was created with the purpose of creating an alternative to reality. These were portable, kind of almost like a portable piece of wall, really. These were kind of diptychs or triptychs, either a twofold or a triple portrait or painting. They did have kind of somewhat formulaic kind of expressions, color to symbolize nuance and context so that you understood, or if you were illiterate, you would have some understanding of what the meaning was. And so this actually, to just quickly jump back to, if I could go back a few slides here, to this idea, When you look at Byzantine iconography, you will see that Jesus and Mary are represented differently. Jesus is represented with a red inner tunic and with a blue outer tunic, meaning that he has a a divine interior core, a divine being that is cloaked in a blue human life, which is very core to the concept of Christianity at this point, with the idea of Jesus quite literally being referred to as the Word made flesh, the intangible made tangible. The Virgin is thus represented as his opposite, in the opposite direction. She is represented with a blue inner tunic. She is first and foremost a human who has been granted grace by her acceptance of, this is my Catholic school showing here, being a willing participant in what has been asked of her. So when you do look at iconography, you will actually see, so here you can see the Christ figure is shown with a red interior tunic and a blue outer tunic. So again, the interior immortal life cloaked in the mortal life. Okay, so, but all of this is kind of coming to a head, and it really comes to head with Giotto. So this is really where we enter what is called the Proto-Renaissance. And the Proto-Renaissance is really, well, pretty much what it sounds like. They are advances in the visual art form of painting that lead up to the Renaissance, but aren't quite necessarily incorporated into it. So on the left-hand side, you see the typical of the time representation of the crucifixion, of a typical Byzantium representation. And so here, if I just isolate the figure on the left, yes, that is a mannerized human figure. Yes, we do have abdomens. We have abs. They don't quite look like that, but that is a stylized version of that. If I look to the right-hand side, Giotto, you can see this enormous, I mean, it might be difficult by 21st century eyes, but that is an enormous leap. These are happening side by side. And when we look at the figure on the right, there is a sense of anatomy, dimensionality, a singular light source. There is a sophistication to this figure on the right that is just not found. It's almost as if the figure is breaking free of the flat plinth it is on and is actually starting to feel more sculptural. Here's a closer view for better comparison. You can really see the nuance with the serratus, the rib cage, all of the ribs that are going up into the pit of the neck here. So much more sculptural, so much more in depth. Did you have a question? Yeah.
I was curious, is there kind of a catalyst for him starting to bring back this depiction of?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and I think it's sometimes a little bit hard to determine exactly where that first domino falls, and kind of in the succession of those kind of movements. I think that really Giotto was partially building on the momentum that was already been building up behind him with some of the images that we saw before. But as far as I'm aware, there's not like a singular moment or catalyst that kind of is solely responsible for him pushing him into this direction of a sculptural rendering of a two-dimensional form. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So is this like a return of knowledge?
Yes. I am going to get to that. I promise. So yeah. So in short, the answer is yes. It is a return, or people of the Renaissance would have termed this a return of knowledge. So yes, we are definitely going to touch on that. So, and this is also another representation of that. This is a Duccio, and I know that this doesn't seem a million miles away from some of the icons that we just looked at, but you have to again try to look with a non-modern mind, which I know is a big ask. But these angels are stacked behind each other. There are angels in the front, angels in the back. That is a big step in the sense of making a two-dimensional surface look three-dimensional. It's a little hard to say in this reproduction, but there are three-dimensional halftones. There is a modeling. There is a transition happening. The Christ child here does feel more like a toddler. A strange-looking toddler, but a toddler nonetheless. So there is again, there is a little bit more naturalism than what was considered as a norm prior. And so this is Giotto. So you can see going back from this depiction of Madonna and Child to the lamentation. So this is where Christ is taken off of the cross and his corpse is being lamented over by his followers, his mother notably, of course. So what's really, to me, one of the most notable figures kind of in art history is this green figure in the front. That green figure in the front overlaps the Christ figure and pushes that totally into, that creates a layer of space. And so that figure alone is it's kind of like that Neil Armstrong small step for man kind of thing. It's like that already pushes almost the main focus. It's a very daring act to kind of conceal part of your main focus with a figure that you don't even know who it is. The face is obscured. But that weaves this whole lamentation into the back. You can see also that Giotto is going through lengths to create expression. These are not just blank caricatures. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
Yes.
Could it be related to like a modesty thing? Was there any
A modesty.
Because like the green guy is like right
Censorship.
where it needs to be.
Oh, yes, I see. Yes. Yes. So that's actually a very good point. However, typically in traditional forms of this depiction, he is covered with a loincloth.
Never mind, thank
So, but that is a great point. They are covering the no bit. So it's kind of like it's a great censorship. But again, Giotto is going through great pains. I mean, if you look at Saint John here, the man, first of all, the position that he's in, arms outstretched, the far arm, another daring move. We don't see the far arm; it is so foreshortened. We just see the hand being, being eclipsed by his shoulder. Not really a move that most artists would have made at this time. But again, this pained expression, you can see on a few people here, they're almost in mid-scream. So this is a very kind of, even the angels are also kind of in a certain level of distress and not really the typical kind of formulaic putti that we saw not too long ago. If I go back up, I promise I won't be backtracking this much all throughout. Here. So again, very different. Okay. So this is what Giotto does. This is the standard. And so again, this is to give you context on why Giotto is such an important figure in art history. When we look at his work now, again, I know that through our eyes it has somewhat of a primitive feel to it. But even the fact that he is just taking the singular color, so the blue of the tunic or the green of this individual, and is rendering them in monochromatic shades of that singular color is a huge advancement in the visual language of painting. Yeah.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Did he use models? Did he actually look at people?
Yes. So the question was, did he look at people? And I do think that Giotto, when you do look at these faces, there is a certain level of individuality where I do think there was a certain level of observation. But especially when you look at some of the young females, there is a certain kind of rubber stamp, kind of formulaic kind of expression there. I don't think that he had live models there and was copying them loyally. I think he might have been referencing people that he knew or people that were around him. But live models and being loyal to live models is not really a common practice until Caravaggio shows up. That's what makes him so unique. So I think he was, but I don't think he was, I don't think he had so-and-so posing and then kind of like, and going over. It doesn't seem that way. Obviously I wasn't there, but it seems that way anyway. Yeah. Okay. So here we actually kind of get to the Renaissance itself. And now this is kind of the thing when again, when we think of the Renaissance, we kind of think of really the birth of kind of art discipline, which is kind of that of a visual language in paint. Now, actually, the term Renaissance and why we call it the Renaissance actually is thanks to this man, Giorgio Vasari. Now, Giorgio Vasari wrote, I guess I forgot to include that slide. Giorgio Vasari writes a very extensive biography of artists that are contemporary at his time. You have to remember this man is living at a time where Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael are living and working at the same time around him. So he's also a painter. not a very good one. But he's one of his main contributions to art history is really his books. Although I will say some of the stories are a bit apocryphal and aren't exactly reliable, but as a main source of information, it is very valuable. But in his descriptions on what he's observing going around him, he describes it as a Renasciat, and I apologize for any not native Italian speakers if I'm butchering your language, but that basically means a rebirth, and this is why we call this Renaissance, is that it is derived from this term, and specifically from Giorgio Vasari. Now, Giorgio Vasari is a little problematic. In Giorgio Vasari's text on the main painters that define the Renaissance, he leaves out anybody that is north of the Alps. So there is a huge chunk missing from the story of the Renaissance. And so as a consequence, somewhat of a ripple effect of that choice actually, in common terms, we actually differentiate between the Italian Renaissance and Northern Renaissance because of that somewhat of a distinction. So this is actually a painting of the Northern Renaissance by Roger van der Weyden. Now, when you're looking at this painting, one of the things that I think you would be struck by is its immense skill. These figures are based off of real people. This man over here on the right-hand side next to the dying Christ looks like he could be walking down the street. And there is no illusions made about the confines. If you look very carefully on the left-hand side, there are shadows of the figures implied onto the gold background. There, if you look at the bottom right-hand side, I know it might be difficult for you to see, there are purposeful angles on the bottom right-hand side of the grass meeting the wall that follow the perspective. So the gold background, which previously meant in Byzantium this kind of this space out of space, this kind of eternal gold, here, Roger van der Weyden is actually kind of turning that on its head and making it a literal spatial space, almost as if these clusters of figures are somehow in this niche somehow. So it's all about illusionism, really. But if you look at the figures here, I mean, if you look at the composition, again, there is a little bit of the hangover from the iconography. They're all somewhat, well, I don't want to say flat, but there's not a sense of chiaroscuro, as the Italians will call it, or light and dark. There is a little bit, but the light is clearly very frontal. There's a certain flatness to the whole thing at the same time. So it's really in the rendering of the individual objects that you really see the difference between the Italian and the Northern Renaissance. And that is also going to be a bit of an echo of a larger issue that happens. So this is Roger van der Weyden. This is happening north of the Alps. This is Raphael, and this is the same subject, but how different. If you look at Raphael's Christ is being taken away by a Herculean figure. This main figure in the background of him arching back really harkens back to kind of Hellenistic art. This is even kind of the clothing that he's wearing. And that really is kind of getting back to the earlier point of a revival, a rebirth. This was very much reviving the ancestors of ancient Rome and the idea that the high point of nature is fulfilled in the human being, and the highest form of fulfillment in a human being is that of art. So art is a very elevated idea at this time period. Now, actually, if you do, and as I know most of you are very well-trained students here, you might notice that there's a size difference in some of these figures, especially if you look at the figures on the right, this cluster of women. This is Mary, the mother, and again, a reference to Byzantium. Her blue cloak, although it's a bit reversed, so she has the blue on the outside as opposed to the inside, as well as these other women. They are smaller than the other figures. I don't know if that comes across very clearly here. And they suspect the reason for that is a difference in cartoon. A different drawing was used to transfer these figures instead of these figures, which is why they read slightly different. Not necessarily to talk about diminishment, like the figures receding into the background, because they don't really read that way. So Northern and Italian and Northern Renaissance. So I chose two pinnacle achievements of each so-called movement to show you their differences. And I think this is a really great demonstration of that. So on the right-hand side, you have Raphael's Transfiguration, which, and I won't rewind, the Byzantine icon of the white with all of that angular shapes. This is the Renaissance equivalent of that. Okay, really quick. Keep this in your mind. That. So from that to Raphael. So a very, very big jump in terms of the visual language and just mindset, really. And so for some of you fourth bargers, I don't know if you notice this kneeling woman in the foreground who's pointing, but that is one of our fourth bargs, and this is the painting that she comes from. So on the left-hand side, we are now looking at the Northern Renaissance. This, of course, is the Arnolfini Marriage by Jan van Eyck. And this is the total opposite of the painting on the right-hand side. This painting over here is enormous, over life size, well, pretty much life size. It actually was one of the last things that Raphael painted. It actually was exhibited at his death, if you can imagine. This was unveiled with his dead body right underneath it, which is somewhat, in a way, poetic. This idea of a transfiguration also being kind of your epitaph. And in all honesty, this is probably, in my opinion, Raphael's best painting. If he did nothing else, he would be famous from this work. But look at the Van Eyck. Van Eyck is also is earlier than Raphael, so he's kind of on the scene way before. Van Eyck is sometimes credited with inventing oil paint. That is completely not true. We have oil paintings, or what we would term as oil paintings, dating from from literally 800, from different parts of the world. So he's certainly not the person to invent it, but he was definitely one of the first people that could really push its boundaries and what it was capable of. And so this portrait here, there has been so many speculations about what it is, what it meant. Is she pregnant? Is she not pregnant? She is not pregnant, but that was definitely a very popular kind of viewpoint at this time. So this dress was actually, you could see on the edges of the fringe, it was fur-lined. So the dress was very thick. So really what she's doing is she's holding up this enormous train. And so there's an enormous amount of fabric in front of her, which gives the impression that she's pregnant, but she is not. So this is Arnolfini. He is an Italian. Merchant, and actually has his portrait painted by. Oops. Well, we'll get to it, I guess. He has his painted portrait by Van Eyck even before this one actually happens. But this painting really is. So I had the pleasure of seeing this in the National Gallery a few years ago, and even the best high-res picture pales in comparison. The illusionism of this is so successful and so hard to describe. I can't imagine what it was like to see it when it must have looked like magic, because it still looks like magic. But it also does have some symbolism laden here too. So for example, the chandelier above here has a single candle that's lit. Typically that is a reference for the eye of God, the watchful eye of God who sees all. This clearly does seem to have something to do with marriage, the removal of the shoes and also the dog being a symbol of fertility. These are all kind of things that were also in a bedroom, but that doesn't necessarily mean what it means today. Bedrooms were also a place where you would more commonly welcome people to entertain them. It wasn't what they are today. But one of the things that makes this and so incredible is the amount of detail. So if we focus on the mirror in the back, so this is it up close. And so you can't, so the circles that we see around the main mirror, these are what are called the 12 mysteries of the cross. And so these are the 12 stages of Jesus' suffering on his way to the cross. And if you look, there are figures rendered in each little circle. It is a tour de force of abilities. If you look at these transparent glass beads, their reflection on the wall, individual hairs of the tassels. So it is suspected, so here we see, of course, both Arnolfini and his wife from the back in the convex mirror here, distorted appropriately. And it is suspected that the blue figure in between them is, of course, Van Eyck himself in the act of painting. And some people even suggest that that's him holding his palette and he's in the midst of painting. This is all speculative. We have no idea of knowing, but it would track if that were a self-portrait. Yes?
To go back to a previous question.
Yes.
Working from life now?
Is he working from life now? Yes, he is working from life now. So these are observed portraits where they are actually kind of Now, I don't know if I would say that they're maybe standing as, say, like somebody would for Sargent, which was a very different environment, but they were giving time in order to get a likeness and everything. So, and this is Van Eyck. This is, well, okay, I should say this is a supposed self-portrait of Van Eyck. It's very small, and it's still in its original frame that was designed for it. And this is sometimes called a turban, but this is not a turban. This is actually a very popular hat men would, at this time, would have used. And it has a piece that hangs down, and during regular it's like when you came into a space, you would actually put it up, almost like women put their hair up to work, a very similar idea. And so that's what's happening here. But it's an immaculate portrait. It really is incredible. Here are two other examples of Northern versus Italian Renaissance. On the left-hand side, we have Albrecht Dürer. He is 28 years old when he paints this self-portrait. And then, of course, we have Raphael on the right-hand side, the so-called Constigliano portrait over here. And again, it goes to show you the differences within philosophies. On the left-hand side, you see an almost uncompromising, slavish, loyal copying of reality that are turning, like that reality in and of itself is so complex, so diverse, that replicating it in and of itself is almost an act of service. So you have to remember that at this time too, or not too long before this, Martin Luther is breaking away from the church. And so in Northern Europe, this idea of breaking away from a main sense of government, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, such as the church, and having this like, so Martin Luther's kind of basic argument was all you really need is the word of God and nothing else. So there was this almost like an individuality and this thirst to reform society into that religious idea. And you can see that in Northern painting. That reality, God's reality, is so precious and so perfect that why would I change anything? I just want to replicate that. And if I can get close to that, I share in that creation. Whereas in Italy, basically it's, I can do better. No, not really. But it's basically, it's an elevation of reality. These are individuals perfected. The idea that art is to elevate reality. It is not a replication. I think, as Aristotle said, well, I don't want to misquote, but to the words of the effect of any simpleton can turn a mirror at the world, meaning that kind of like it's more of a task to kind of artfully interpret the human form than just to merely replicate it. So both have their points of view, and I think that when you kind of marinate in either one of them, you kind of are either team Northern Renaissance or team Italian Renaissance, and it's like, I totally get what you're going for. But they're both kind of beautiful sides of the same coin. One is not better than the other, they are just different. Now, on the portrait of Raphael, one of the most inventive, and I know it seems really remedial, one of the most inventive and important inventions is that cast shadow. And I know I've talked to many of you about cast shadows. If I remove that cast shadow on the right-hand side, the whole space flattens. That cast shadow tethers the man to the wall. And because of that edge quality and value, I understand that relationship. So it takes an otherwise abstract space into there's an interaction now, a dialogue between sitter and environment. But I mean, look at that. I mean, like that is just like, I mean, so Dürer is really the first celebrity artist. He was like the Jeff Koons before Jeff Koons, the Damien Hirst before Damien Hirst. He knew how important branding was and how important presenting his image was. People at this time period were thought to be their most beautiful at the age of 28. And so here he is at 28 years old. And it is no coincidence that he's presenting himself in what is called a pentecrator, or a reverential depiction of Christ. I mean, very Christ-like. This AD, his brand, it was on everything he ever did. It was important for his collectors and for his brand, for people to see that, this AD. His hair was also very important. There's actually a lock of hair that survives of Albrecht Dürer's, and you can see that it was very well attended to. It looks great. So we don't know, I don't know if he dyed it necessarily, but he took very good care of it. And it is this strawberry blonde color that we see here. But again, so this is also a little bit of a tour de force where Dürer's showing off because he's like, as a technician, this is a hard view to paint as a self-portrait because you have to look at yourself and then draw yourself fully frontal. So he's kind of also saying, I know this is hard, but I do that well anyway. But he can say that because I do have to say, Dürer's work, it really is, this especially is really just miraculous. It really is wonderful. But to again, I mean, even this, like, and I think I would also tell people to take note of the edge of the fabric and how much care Raphael is going from a sharp, well-designed edge at the top and how it softens as it enters the cast shadow. So everything is very, there's no fat on the painting. Everything is put to use. Every square inch has a function. So the Raphael portrait that we see here, Rembrandt catches a view of it in the 1630s, and he makes a sketch of it, and we see that on the left-hand side. It actually serves also as a model for his etching of a self-portrait with his arm firmly on the aristocratic stone ledge. I know this is fast-forwarding a number of years, but Rembrandt is really fame-obsessed. So like he wants to be famous, and he really wants to be Peter Paul Rubens. He buys a house from the same realtor. He dresses up like Rubens. He puts himself, that's a Rubens pose. He basically wants to be a Dutch Rubens, essentially. So he is fame obsessed. And he constantly depicts himself with this gold chain. So a painter would be presented with these gold chains of being when you were presented a high honor or something like this. And Simon Schama, who's a great art historian, he talks about this, and he calls Rembrandt massively chainless. But he's so thirsty for this notoriety. But this is so whenever I see this is him, like he's trying hard to be serious. But eventually this also culminates in the self-portrait that he makes at about a very similar age, a little bit older. He's in his early 30s at this point, but at a similar age to Dürer. It's a little hard to see here, but this is beautifully rendered. And in the face, there are some of these beautiful, cool pinks. But there is an air of suspense here. It's almost like here Rembrandt is at the top of his game, super famous. Like everybody, he's got a long list of clients, all this sort of stuff. But there is an air of like, I can't believe this is happening. Kind of like that. That's kind of almost what I get from this in a strange way. Also at the National Gallery, and amazing. But anyway, not about Rembrandt. But going back to the Arnolfini, this is Arnolfini. So this is the portrait that Van Eyck paints before the Arnolfini marriage. This is a very tiny, I believe this is like 9 by 11 or something like that. So very, very tiny. But you can see just so immaculately painted, and that red headdress, just beautifully, beautifully painted.
Question. Would
Yes.
that red have been glazed like our red cloth assignment?
So, would that have been glazed? Sort of. I know that's a very unsatisfying answer. But not the way that so when, this is somewhat of a very inside question. So in our assignments, the first still life assignment students do is a red, white, and green theme. And the red part is a red fabric that students do in a glazing method, where they do a red underpainting and glaze red on top of it to navigate some tricky things about working with red. That is a more Italian application of glazing. This would not be the same way. Northerners are more direct in painting as well as in interaction. So this would not have been done in that manner. That's a much more Italian application, I would say. So as I said earlier, this Van Eyck self-portrait, it's in its original frame. And these words are not carved, they're painted into it. so it's another tour de force. So what this is Van Eyck. This is Van Eyck's motto, and again, I really apologize if I mispronounce it, but it's "Als ich kann," or "as only I can," or "if I can." In one way, he's basically saying, only I can do this. Of course, this is me. That's one way to interpret it. I think another way is like, if I can, like, if only I can. It's kind of more of a hopeful kind of thing. In the Pre-Raphaelites, as we see here, the Arnolfini portrait really affected ripple effects all through even modern history. If we think of the mirror in the back, the Pre-Raphaelites were obsessed with the Arnolfini portrait. The National Gallery acquired the Arnolfini portrait while the Pre-Raphaelites were students there, and they became absolutely obsessed with it. And that's one of the reasons why they termed themselves Pre-Raphaelites. Van Eyck is Pre-Raphael. And they associated the Renaissance with kind of the erudite, bourgeoisie, kind of very highfalutin, hard to understand, art for rich people, basically. And so here you have William Morris Hunt on the left-hand side, a British painter, and on the right-hand side you have John William Waterhouse, actually both British painters. And both of them are using mirrors to reflect the kind of our viewpoint, and in a way they're making a very small space feel a lot bigger just by reflecting that back. So Van Eyck's kind of effects are happening all the way up into the 1800s here. And of course, the Arnolfini portrait was in the collection of Spanish royals for a very long period of its history. And Diego Velázquez, of course, being a royal portraitist, would have had access. And that did influence Las Meninas, where we can see the mirror, which is actually us, of the royal couple. We are the royal couple in this painting, and that is our reflection in the far wall. So he must have been observant and influenced by Van Eyck. It is just too similar for that to have happened. So going back to Italy, so we do know what Leonardo's idea of, so when it comes to the Italian difference here is, again, this idea of reviving Roman classical. So we are reviving Roman classical ideals to, of course, for them, what modern times was. So we know what Leonardo's idea of the ideal human male form is, which is this. And in fact, I think this is on like astronaut suits or something like that. This has like it's kind of something that has some kind of intergalactic presence, I think. But you have to remember, like, this is being dug up at the time. Michelangelo was actually called on site when the Laocoon, this statue, is actually found. I can't imagine what it would have been like to not know that this type of sculpture existed, and then somebody says, hey, we found something, and you see something that, especially Michelangelo being a sculptor, that you just can't believe. And Michelangelo was hugely influenced by this sculpture in particular. But this idea of kind of elevating these human archetypes to the highest kind of level of human performance. So it's a very different idea than that of the North, as we're seeing here. So again, but that doesn't mean that everybody in Italy agrees on interpreting Roman classicism. So if we look at Leonardo here, this is his idea of the perfect male figure. Defined, supple, slightly feminine at times as well, beautifully defined. This is Michelangelo's idea of the ideal human form. Very different. Leonardo called Michelangelo's drawings, or he called his figures, bags of potatoes, because as far as Leonardo was concerned, they were just random protuberances sticking out everywhere. But again, kind of going back to Egyptian kind of idea, Michelangelo is choosing the most characteristic lighting per muscle to give you the most visually rich experience of the human body possible. So of course, when I look at this, I don't believe there's a singular light source, but I believe that that is a beautiful human body. What gets him into trouble is very much that same idea. This is an angel, according to Michelangelo, which was very much against church doctrine. And he gets into some trouble with some of the cardinals at this time. So here on the left, we have Leonardo on the right-hand side. We've got Michelangelo on the left-hand side here. How different. So on the left-hand side, again, everything is like it's like volumes turned up to 11 and stays there for the whole thing. But on the right-hand side, it's more naturalistic. So basically, Michelangelo is somebody who wrestles with this kind of love of pagan art, but also kind of costumed in Christian dogma. Whereas Leonardo's the pragmatist. He studies human behavior. He studies the visual world and represents to you the perfected visual world, but it has nothing to do with spirituality. And then Raphael comes in. So I mean, again, I can't imagine being in Florence. You've got these three people working all at the same time. You've got Leo, Mikey, and Raffi all in the same place. It's kind of amazing. But anyway, Raphael is a very charismatic and gets along with Leonardo very well. I mean, he's a young, attractive, very talented, charismatic man. So of course Leonardo likes him. On the left-hand side, you can see actually a copy that Raphael is doing of a drawing by Da Vinci, and he's using it as the model of his Saint Catherine on the right-hand side. Saint Catherine is the Catholic patron saint of music. She is tortured on the wheel that she is holding, but then God breaks it with a lightning bolt and all this. But you can see that there, I mean, it's again, obviously it's not plagiarism, but you can see this, the overlap of the hips and all the turning of the shoulder. There is a similarity here. So Raphael's a sponge. He learns very quickly, and some might say he steals. So on the left-hand side, we have Raphael. And funnily enough, this is thought to be a portrait of Michelangelo. But it is suspected that Raphael is doing this painting of the thank you very much, School of Athens in the papal apartments, and at the same time, Michelangelo is doing this on the right-hand side. Again, it's like, I can't imagine. Like, you've got these two things going on at once. But anyway, Raphael is really stealing from him. He's going into the Sistine Chapel, he's looking up and he's making... And so again, it is not a direct parallel, but there are similarities. And if you do look at some of the figures in the Sistine Chapel, you will see some similarities with the School of Athens and other seated figures. He's also borrowing from Leonardo. So we can see that he does a sketch of the Mona Lisa in the middle here and uses that composition for his own portrait of a young woman on the right-hand side. Of course, very different, but still the nucleus is very much there. There's no denying that he was influenced by Leonardo. So Michelangelo, I know it's a very cliche answer, but he probably is the greatest artist that's ever lived. I mean, it's when you're called when your nickname on the street is the Terribilita, the Holy Terror, because you are so good. I mean, come on. But our viewpoint is from oil painting, and unfortunately, Michelangelo is not an oil painter, but he does have he's kind of an oil painter. So for a time, he is friends with a painter named Sebastiano del Piombo. And if you do not know him, I really recommend you do know this painter. He is a really an amazing painter. And in fact, it's because he gets into well, this is all hearsay, but he gets into a tiff with Michelangelo. And I wonder if it's because of that tiff that people don't know him as well. Because of that, Michelangelo just wasn't happy with him. But so Sebastiano del Piombo is an oil painter, and Michelangelo supplies him with drawings that he then turns into paintings. So the figure of the dead Christ in this Pieta, Michelangelo did the drawing for. This is one of the studies he did. Obviously, the pose is different, so he didn't use it. So in a way, Michelangelo is there, but he didn't paint it, but he did draw the figure. We see that again here in the Raising of Lazarus. This is an enormous painting. The figure of Christ is life-size. This actually was the first painting purchased by the National Gallery in London. And so if you look at the figure of Lazarus on the left-hand side, this is Sebastiano del Piombo on the left, this is Michelangelo on the right. And so you can see a very, very close kind of cropping here. Even closer here, you can see much more clearly. So Michelangelo is basically giving him, it's almost like a director. It's like Martin Scorsese's writing the script, but Steven Spielberg's filming it. So it's kind of like it is a little bit of a collaboration. However, there is rumors of Michelangelo, well, again, this is where, when fact is not there, kind of, legend and, anecdote kind of abound. But when Michelangelo is painting the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, and it is hypothesized that with Sebastiano da Piombo's urging, he tries oil paint and it does not go very well and it slows him down. And Michelangelo gets really mad and cuts ties with Sebastiano. We don't know for sure if that's the reason of their split. They were very close for a number of years. They were godfather to each other's children, but they do eventually split around this time. So it's hypothesized that that's the case. But again, we don't know for sure. So when painting this, I mean, I don't know what to call it. Masterpiece doesn't quite do it. This enormous tour de force. It was scandalous because he is showing divine people nude. And he was, when criticized, he said, something to the effect of, how is the shoe nobler than the foot? The body is the soul's book and God makes the body. So he was very much kind of at odds with cardinals of this time. Even the Christ figure was shown nude originally before the drapery you see now was painted over. So that is all actually another artist's hand later. But one cardinal in particular, whose name I did write down because I did want to I want to make sure that we shame him appropriately. So this cardinal's name is Biagio de Cesena. And he really was railing against this, like, you can't have naked bodies, this is a disgrace. So Michelangelo has the last laugh and puts him as as the judge of the damned, sprouting ass ears and a tail that is a snake that's biting his genitals. So, and actually, if you look in the actual painting of the Last Judgment, you will see he's over here, off to the left hand. So, very discreet. No one will notice. Okay, but that's not to say that even though Raphael is borrowing and understanding, that's not to say that Raphael himself is not an independent source of creative force. So, I mean, we can see here through his portraiture, we've already seen his Transfiguration, the School of Athens. This is a very, very proficient, almost frightfully gifted prodigy of a person. But he is learning from the best and he's borrowing from those ideas. Now, one moment I like here is this is where kind of like the North and South are meeting. So Dürer makes his way to Venice. Dürer is a true journeyman. A journeyman was the title given to an artist when they finished their training and then they were to go out in the world. At this stage or this point in time, you would be buying elements to use in paintings, you would be sketching, you might be studying temporarily, doing workshops as well, but you were termed as a journeyman and it really enforced that you travel. That was a very important part of it. And Dürer does travel. He goes to Venice and he meets Giovanni Bellini, which we see on the left-hand side. A few years later, Dürer creates the portrait on the right. And so you can see Bellini's clear influence on Dürer. Dürer is really taken by what the Venetians offer in terms of execution. He's also a little pissed because he's very fame obsessed, like I said, and they don't know who he is, but they know him from his etchings. And they said, oh, you're good as long as it's black and white. Like, so very kind of like, very jabbing terms in those. So he does this enormous painting of, I believe it's called the Madonna of the Rosary. And then, of course, all of Venice is in admiration and they're standing up when he comes to a table. They treat him like a general after that. So, he's happier after that. So, but another Northern Renaissance artist who I really would be remiss without mentioning is, of course, Hans Holbein. This is Hans Holbein's painting titled The Ambassadors. This is an enormous painting. Again, it's something that I've had the privilege of seeing in person in the National Gallery, and it is just really enormous. It's just incredible. This is actually Jean de Dinteville on the left-hand side and Georges de Selve on the right-hand side. Funnily enough, just like with Dürer's self-portrait, Jean de Dinteville is 28, 29 at this time. I am not sure how I think Georges de Selve is a bit younger. I think he's in his early to mid-20s, but I can't remember exactly how old he is. But for numerous reasons, you can understand why this is an absolutely incredible feat of painting. the marble patterning on the floor that is in recession of a gradient in a fall of light, the patterning of the green fabric in the background, not to mention the million objects with mathematical precision that he is writing on. The globe has countries, cities, numbers. There is no suggestion. Everything is depicted.
There's even a song on that book, like this sheet music on that book.
So the sheet music on the book is actually quite interesting because those two pieces do not belong together in the actual, if you refer to the initial songbook. These are two different pages that are put together. And effectively, it's basically saying, "Come, Holy Ghost," and it's a plea to heal because Christendom is splitting at this point, and so Catholic France is very nervous. Jean de Dinteville is at the Tudor court at this time. He is with Henry VIII at this point, and so Henry's breaking away because he wants to marry and he wants that male heir, and so Jean de Dinteville is very nervous about this whole Anglican split. And there does seem to be some pleas of unity throughout the painting. So Hans Holbein, again, notable portraitist. The level in which the realism is really just absolutely incredible. It's really it almost is photorealism before photorealism, as we can see here with this beautiful portrait of a young man. Apparently, this blue, I'm sure if this blue background that you see typically in Northern Renaissance, apparently that's the coloring of blue panels in royal palaces, I read, and that's why that's that color. I'm sure there are other many functional reasons, but that was one other hypothesis. So this is a detail of the fabric of the other man. I mean, if you look at the fabric, there is stitching suggested in that. I mean, it's just an absolute amazing tour de force. This is an incredible portrait that is at the Frick Collection in New York. This is Sir Thomas Cromwell. Those sleeves look like you can reach out and palpate and touch them. They are so soft. I mean, they really are just absolutely incredible. Those alone, if all he ever did in his life were just those two damn red sleeves, I would bow. Like, just absolutely incredible. So this does involve some glazing, but again, not into the extreme that we might be accustomed to. And I mean, the portrait is just incredible. The gray of the 5 o'clock shadow, the individual stubbles, the baggy eyes of someone who is, slavishly kind of obedient to his king, the crow's feet, all of this, absolutely just incredible. The fur as well, to contrast this kind of weathered face of court. Absolutely incredible. And the first, like, nobody has painted portraits like this before. Like, this must have been seeing, like, color TV for the first time, seeing a Holbein portrait. Absolutely incredible. So annoyingly, 90% of this painting is painted in one layer.
Oh,
That is
Yeah.
I hate that.
Annoyingly, most of this is done in one shot. The faces do have about 2 to 3 layers. They would have been comprised of a lead white and neutral orange underpainting, upon which darker halftones and shadows would have been transparently superimposed on. The other parts of this painting that would have had multiple layers are the sleeves of Jean de Dinteville. Jean de Dinteville is showing off his wealth with this pink satin, wish I had it, kind of fluffy business that he has there.
so. That's painted the one with the killer sleeves. The red sleeves are painted. That's like
No, this one.
just that one. Okay.
Yeah, not this guy.
Okay, 'cause I
Yeah,
was like, that's
yeah.
Yeah.
This one.
Yes. Although, funnily enough, he does lose his head over one of the future brides of Henry VIII. Although it's not Holbein's fault, because people think that Holbein represented her more attractive than she was. That's not the truth. So Holbein lives through that, but unfortunately, Thomas Cromwell does not. So yes, so roughly about 2 to 3 layers to get to this resolution of the face. Irritating. But I really, like, I really can't tell you how convincing and sculptural, and just that nose is just incredible. So there's also these objects on the table. There have been papers on papers written about what these things mean. And we can't really say for 100% certainty, but basically what we can say is these so there's two tiers. There's a lower tier and an upper tier that you can see if we zoom back to the bigger painting here. So there's an upper tier of objects and a lower tier. The upper tier do refer to celestial objects, telescopes, anything that has to do with astronomy. The lower tier has to do with earthly things, a globe, a lute, a prayer book. So it seems to have to do something with the separation of heavenly bodies and earthly bodies.
That's why the skull is in the bottom.
So yes, so the skull,
What skull?
yeah, so I know. So actually, there's a couple cool little things about this one section that I just want to mention. One, a demonstration of skill, a lute in perspective. Again, that is not an easy task, and yet he is making it look that way. There is also one broken string. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm going to try to point to it. Do you see this, like, that is the broken string of the lute. Again, a lute is usually used to refer to peace, love, and usually lovers play lutes. This is, again, Christendom is splitting. It's the fractaling of that love or that peace and harmony that's breaking apart. On the globe here, what's really interesting is that so Jean de Dainfield owns a chateau called Policy, and right in the middle of the globe you see labeled Policy, like as if he's saying, that's what I got, like that's me. I did also come across, so one of the things about Holbein, we don't know what his language skills were. He would have spoken German, but he was in an English court. One of the interesting things I came across in a lecture I was hearing was that Paris is spelt with a B, Barris, and that might indicate his misunderstanding of how things were pronounced. And so instead of Paris, it's spelt Barris, but it's an oopsie kind of a thing. And these sleeves, there are dozens of glazes that are in the darker halftones and shadows of these sleeves. And that's what gives it this incredible luminous intensity that you're seeing here. Yeah.
So is this an example of when we've talked about layering like the white and...
Yes. So this is a little bit more almost of a Venetian technique where you are sandwiching a glaze, working into it with white, a glaze, working into it with white, sometimes wiping away the glaze. So several layers are used here to achieve this kind of shiny iridescent fabric. So on the left-hand side we have Holbein, on the right-hand side we have me, and this is my attempt at kind of after doing some research, trying to kind of replicate what was going on with the sleeve here. And so this was the progression of the sleeve. And so we can see starting from a very high chroma and very shapy beginning with layering of glazing. So pretty much the palette for this was vermilion, white, a little bit of black, and alizarin crimson. Those were the only colors that were used in this. And so with about 4 to 5 layers, I was able to arrive at something that was somewhat close to the initial model here. But you can see how the working back and forth of glazing and working white into it, how that back and forth results into something like this. But it is difficult. You really have to be able to kind of look stages ahead in order to kind of steer the ship. It is not the easiest way of painting. Yes.
Can you go back to it?
Yeah.
So from the first stage to the second stage, did you do like alizarin over the first one?
Yes.
And then let it dry and put the white?
So if we imagine the first one is on my easel, I glazed that with alizarin crimson and then worked into it with lead white to arrive at image number 2.
So you got the lead white that white while working to it wet with alizarin?
Yes. Yeah. I might have wiped off to help me out. That might also be like 2 layers, like I did it once and then like, oh, that looks a little dim, and then I just beefed up the whites a little bit. That I can't quite remember because it was a while ago, but that might be that. Okay. And then the blacks, you'll notice, come in at the end. So unlike our more modern 19th century approach, the darkest dark, the lightest light are the first arrivals on the scene. Here, the darkest dark is one of the last things that go in.
I think that's
Because you're using the paint differently here, where you're using opacity versus transparency. And so to achieve these darks that read dark but luminous, you work towards an opacity through layers of mild transparency. And that's what, so the light is penetrating the paint layer as well as striking the surface, giving you a dark, but a dark that glows. It doesn't read like a matte dark. So Holbein also is somebody who we have a lot of cartoons for, because Holbein's work ethic was really to go out and sit with somebody, draw them with a number of pastels and different crayons. So as we can see here, sometimes you'll see notes. They are in German, but you'll see like, this should be reddish. This is going to be black satin. This is yellowish. These are notes he is taking back into the studio, and then Frankenstein's, the portraits that we know today from his notes and his memory and his cartoon. And so you can see these beautiful pen and ink drawings. We don't know exactly how long they took, but for Katarina of Denmark, we do know, because there's documentation. This is a prospective bride of Henry VIII when he was looking for his next. This is a 16-year-old widow. And she, so he sends Holbein, like, I hear she's available. I hear she's young. Go draw her and let me know what she looks like. So, because you can't, there's no like profile that you can download. So Catherine of Denmark, she was said to have had a very pleasant lisp when she spoke. She also was said to have very beautiful hands as well. But we do know that Holbein had 3 hours. That's it, 3 hours space. That's the only time he had with her. So this painting, which is again in the National Gallery, I feel like I have stock in them, I keep mentioning them, is life-size. This is an enormous painting, and this is a large oak panel. So it's very not feasible that Holbein is loading up this enormous oak panel and making this trek and only to have 3 hours with Katrina. So most likely what he had did was were drawings like the ones we just saw, of very careful prescribed drawings, not only of her face, but certainly of her hands, which are given place of prominence here. When he brought whatever he brought back from drawing her, Henry was apparently so smitten and so happy with her beauty that he ordered the court musicians to play the whole day long afterwards. But
I wonder what they do with Bumbled.
Right? Well, Henry was really kind of, he wanted to have a beauty pageant for his next wife. He basically was suggesting to France, hey, why don't we have a parade in Marquet? We'll have all the most beautiful available royal women, and I'll just pick. And France was just like, no. Okay, so going back to, so taking a break from the north now, going now back to Italy, we want to go back to Bellini. So Bellini, who I had mentioned previously as someone who Dürer painted that Madonna that was very similar. This is a Bellini. This is also in the Frick collection, and this is St. Francis of Assisi in not exile, but in solitude, a voluntarily exile. Now, what's really nice about this painting is compositionally, and I've traced it out here for you, is that if you follow the pattern of the rock, it creates the pattern of the hand, as if St. Francis is standing in the hand of God himself. You can even see that there's a dark at the center that I've indicated to almost reference the stigmata, which of course St. Francis receives through divine intervention. But Bellini is an incredibly influential painter, and if you do not know his work, I highly recommend that you go. I mean, this is incredible. Like the vegetation that is modeled in this painting is really out of this world, really incredible. Hello again. But these are also two Bellini paintings as well. You might be familiar with the right-hand painting. This is something that you do see quite a bit when researching art history in Italy. This is a portrait of basically the political leader of Venice at the time. And on the left-hand side, we have a Christ in suffering. Now, Bellini is important because Bellini and Dürer, they know each other, and they actually have jokes between each other. There are inside jokes that actually are found in between paintings. Dürer has an etching where there is a pig rear end sticking out of the edge of the canvas. Like there's like a pig butt that's just kind of sticking out. And in a painting that Giovanni Bellini does, he does the same thing. And we know that it was deliberate, it wasn't cut later. So it must be a private joke between Dürer and Bellini. So they knew each other. But Bellini is also the teacher of another great of the Renaissance, which is Titian, or Tiziano. But we, for some reason, call him Titian. Titian is also unique in the sense that he does not have a singular master. Many painters of this time period have singular masters. I mean, if we think of even Rembrandt, he studied with Peter Lasman. Anthony van Dyck studied with Rubens. There's that singular patron, that is my artistic father, so to speak. Titian is different in the sense that he doesn't have that singularity. He's studied with quite a few people, Giorgione, Cima di Congigliano, Giovanni Bellini, and he's kind of skipped around and has kind of cherry picked and gathered from workshop to workshop. So he's a bit unique in that regard. This is one of his magnum opus paintings. This painting reads as if the brushes were put down yesterday. It literally glows because of the way that Titian actually laid down the paint, which we will get into. And it's just an amazing, absolutely amazing painting. Again, another huge painting. So he's painting. He's really trying to do really well here. This painting was supposed to hang with contemporaries like Michelangelo, Raphael. Eventually, that did not quite happen. But he's anticipating that this is going to be hanging next to those, titans of art. So he's really pushing himself. You can see that if you cast your mind back to the Laocoon, this man wrestling the snake, he appears again here, the Laocoon wrestling the snake here. You can see these two figures mirror each other. They create that's kind of a compositional element of a book ending, where these two figures of symbols kind of actually mimic each other, keeping your focus within that. So this cape that Bacchus is wearing, very similar pink satin that we saw to Holbein. But we do know that exactly about 4 glazes were used to accomplish the effect that we see on the cape, which I mean, Titian for its time is so revolutionary. He is so smitten by Ariadne. He's like almost like dazed. He's kind of like staring, kind of like throwing his cape back, leaping off of his chariot. With leopards, which are typically associated with him. My favorite is this Bacchian worshiper in the back who's big and drunk and barely staying on the donkey in the back there. There's always one of them in every parade. So here he is again with his Holy Family. And so you can see again why Titian was becoming a master of many things, but drapery especially. Now, when you look at the blue drapery here, you are seeing kind of the effects of time. This was not intended to look this way. It would have looked a lot darker, but blues were done with a lot of glazing. Ultramarine blue is a very difficult pigment to really purify and get rid of all the impurities. So the ultramarine blue at this time is sometimes fugitive, and unfortunately it results in some deterioration, as you see here. So that wasn't, he didn't mean for it to look, he would actually kind of say what happened if he were to see that nowadays. And again, very different if we think back again to Byzantium and with the Madonna and Child. Here we are, very different, very much more naturalistic, much more dimensional. Okay, so now as painters, let's start talking about the mechanics. How do they actually go about making these paintings? This is actually a painting of the Madonna of the Baldacchino. It's an unfinished painting by Raphael, and because it's unfinished, it's a gold mine for us because it shows the inner workings of his methodology. So, surfaces that were used at this time period for both the Northern Renaissance and Italian Renaissance. Panel is the most popular surface. This is a carryover from egg tempera. Panel is the most popular. I would say probably not until early to mid 1600s is canvas and linen really the popularized and substitutes panel as the main substrate choice for oil painters. But Venetians popularized that even before its time. Venice is a metropolitan port at this time. So because of that, they have access to a lot of different types of linen for sales. There were three different types of linen at this point: twill, tabby, and herringbone. And you could basically have at this point in time, painters are not that picky. There's quite a few Titian paintings where they've got like all three sewn together. It might have been a service that was actually offered by the fabric store, would be to sew things together, because there was a limit of 1 meter long, because that's how big a loom was for that time. So any canvas that was bigger needed to be amended. Oh, I had the three types there. Oh, here I was thinking, oh, I remember those. Okay, anyway. But anyway, as far as those substrates go, panel was really the preference for a much longer period. And as a interesting kind of side note, the panels that are faring so well today from this period, there are some hypotheses out there that it's similar to a Stradivarius, where the wood that is used for the timber for these panels grew during the second ice age. So they have a unique density to them that makes them age very well. Very much how, like, I believe it's a Stradivarius. If I'm off the mark, I apologize. How there's a unique sound because of the resonance, because of the wood that was grown during the second ice age. So with climate change, who knows? We might have some really great wood on our hands. I don't know. So the first layer of either process, be it the Northern Renaissance or the Italian Renaissance, was a priming layer, or in Italian, the imprimatura, which does mean quite literally the first layer. So painters, and this actually does happen, I have it written here, but this does happen more in the future, like with Caravaggio. Painters will use a thicker imprimatura to fill in the grooves of the canvas to make a smoother surface to paint on. Although, again, at this time, Titian is using coarser canvas, but he's in the minority here. With the priming layer also creates a sense of unity. Everything is kind of pretty much the same color, and it gives you something to react to. So if you're putting down like a dark umber, you can add white to it. It gives you something to jump off of or jump from against. The challenge with imprimaturas, or actually one of the important things, is that they vary incredibly from region to region, artist to artist, time period to time period. So it's helpful in some ways, helping to determine who's done what at what point, but it can also be very confusing at times as well for the very same reason. Okay, so after quite a bit of research, this is basically Raphael's method of painting. So it's very straightforward here. So Raphael would have done a full-fledged cartoon, almost at this point, drawing and painting. Basically, painting it are colored in drawings. Painters are still in love with line at this stage. The idea of drawing with mass, which is a more modern, I guess you could say 19th century idea, hasn't really arrived quite yet. So he would have done a transfer. Now the transfer would have been done differently than you guys do transfers today. They would have used more commonly what's called the pouncing technique, which is a much more laborious technique where somebody would take a tack and put pins all along every contour, and then taking a sack of charcoal dust, you would pounce on that, and it creates quite literally a follow the dots kind of imprint of your drawing. So Raphael would have used that process very regularly, after which he would have cemented that by taking watercolor and watercolor or ink with a dark color, and would have then connect the dots, kind of would have perfected and cemented the transferred drawing. Some hatching and loose rendering would have also been done. So some hatching, some loose washes, just to kind of basically turn forms, would have also been done in this layer. Again, using watercolor or ink. After that, the imprimatura goes on. Now, for most of you who are students here, that sounds very backwards, because you do the imprimatura first and then you transfer. But in this methodology, you do your drawing first, and then you do the imprimatura. What that does is it pushes your your transfer away from you, and it's very milky and kind of murky. So you have the advantage of following it and enhancing it, or pushing it further away and getting rid of something maybe you did not like anymore. So this was also bound with boiled linseed oil. So this was not regular linseed oil. This would have been a heated bodied linseed oil as well, which also is a bit more viscous. It's a bit thicker. So then on top of that, local colors, or what we would call in our school dead coloring, would have been laid in. These are singular tones without any modulation that are laid over the flat sections of flesh, drapery, landscape, any objects that might have occurred as well. So after that, they would have worked what was called a corpo, meaning full-bodied. That means lead white is added. So they would be so Raphael would have rendered his forms monochromatically using the color prior from the initial lay-in, be it yellow, red, whatever it was, plus white, and would model the form. So whatever the form color was, plus white to model. And then at least 2 successive layers after that to further model the form and to intensify the color of said object or person. One of the most, you have to remember that one of the most attractive attributes, oil painting is a relatively new medium. Egg tempera, its predecessor, is pigment that is bound with egg, wine or vinegar and water. It's a very matte medium. What makes oil painting so attractive is that it's pigment suspended in a layer of fat, and the light penetrates that layer of fat and illuminates the painting from within as well as superficially. So painters are really trying to maximize that thin application, that glowing effect, especially in Italy and in northern Italy especially. So this intensity of color, again, this elevation of reality, intensity of color is what was really the aim here. But the darks, again, like I was saying earlier, are achieved by creating successively more opaque layers. And eventually the darks, even in halftones, are black glazes. So I know we don't really think of using black as a glaze, but black is used as a tinter. If your halftones are, you would use black and you would glaze them a little bit darker. But this, but basically this is, and of course I'm generalizing. Of course there are individual unique quirks and not everything went the same, but in a broad scope, this is how Raphael would have actually executed works. Yes?
I'm a little confused about the purpose of the layer with the lead white and the
Yes.
and the linseed oil
Mhm.
before. Is it just to create like a
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So the linseed oil and lead white, it makes the next layer adhere better to what's going on there. It also it gives you it also basically protects your underdrawing, so like you're not kind of at risk of losing it at all. But its main purpose is that it provides just a better surface for you to construct your painting on top of, rather than just going directly on the underdrawing.
So it's kind
Essentially.
of like a slightly transparent layer that was like
Yeah.
like a hazy.
It's
you could see through it, but it's
yeah,
not.
it's milky. We're actually going to see what it looks like. It is milky. It looks like you're looking at a drawing through like a bowl of milk or something. It's yeah.
And this drawing was a completely raw canvas, or whatever they were on.
Yes. So it would have been a panel that would have been so Raphael mainly works on panel, and they would have been completely like burnished to like flat. But yeah, so Raphael mainly does a cartoon and then transfers. What makes Titian, and as we'll see more advanced, is he doesn't do that. And so like I know again in retrospect, no cartoon is like, that doesn't seem very like risky, but at that time period, it's like, no cartoon, are you serious? Like it's kind of it was a much bigger change in process. Yeah.
2 questions.
Yes.
One is about transparency. Is it possible that they were just trying to use little pigments?
Very much so. So some of the other reasons, so when researching old master methods, you have to remember paint was not easy. Like you had to make it. You had to, yeah, you have to make. So glazing is an economical use. You use very little pigment and much more oil. And especially when you're using expensive pigments like red lake or ultramarine blue, it's cost effective. You use very little and more oil. So it is, while it does have technical advantages, it is also practical. And it's kind of great when those 2 things line up. So yes, very much so.
The second question is, so basically in the very beginning, he had with that lead white diluted with linseed oil, he had a fat layer.
Yes, he did. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. So that is tricky. Raphael violates I think in Italian it's the fat over lean. I think in Italian it's called grasso sul magro, but I could be totally off the mark there. He violates that. So he does put oil saturated layers first and then less ones on top. Partially that's because of I think there's a couple factors there. One, he is in Italy, which the climate is warmer, so the oil is drying a little bit faster, and I think that does make a difference. Yeah, and so I think that there's a little bit of that happening. I also think that it's just like, as long as it's dry to the touch, technically you're fine. Although I know, like, some purists will say you should wait 6 months between each layer. It really would be just dry to the touch. But it is definitely the economical use, absolutely, because it's just an easier way to use an expensive pigment. Okay, so Leonardo's painting method that I have here. So now I do have Leonardo's painting method, question mark. Leonardo, it's very hard to pin his methodology down. He didn't finish much. What he did was incomplete, and he did change things. So it's very hard to pin him down. But similar to Raphael, he would have done a cartoon, which was reinforced by a brush and ink or watercolor drawing on top. But more often than not, there's evidence of him going just directly to panel. So he's got a brush in one hand, watercolor, and he's drawing directly on panel. He's not actually doing a full-fledged cartoon. Sometimes, not always. He is also, after reinforcing the transfer with black or dark watercolor, he is then modeling with a blue watercolor for shadows, because in his diaries, I think he also writes that a body casting a shadow on a white wall is blue. So shadows are blue in his mind. So he renders the shadows with a blue watercolor. Sometimes there's a red for parts, and they mix, creating a purple, which he does utilize intentionally. So he does have a considerable amount of modeling, albeit, washy because of the watercolor nature, that he is then building on top of. So on top of that, very much like Raphael, the white priming layer. Again, this layer of lead white with a boiled linseed oil that is placed on top, and it makes this whole thing very milky. There is evidence, though, of black in that initial lead priming, which is basically Leonardo taking black into the still fresh primer and actually modeling with black to get the chiaroscuro, or the effect of light and shadow, while the primer is still wet. After that, there's yet a second layer of priming. So Leonardo would apply a layer of yellow ochre over the entire painting, and then using brown and white, or burnt lake and white, would have worked into that, using the ochre as kind of a mid-tone, and rendering his volumes. On top of that, he would be then layering glazing, scumbling, glazing, scumbling, dry brushing, scumbling. It would have been, so they've taken samples of Leonardo's work, and they have found upwards of 30 layers of minuscule layers of paint to achieve the effects that he had. Well, oil and varnish. He did use some varnish, resinous mediums as well. But it is a laborious kind of layering and layering. Leonardo said painting for him is like, form is like a smoke, hence the term sfumato. And whenever you hear the term sfumato, it might make you believe that it's a totally different form of painting. It's not, it's glazing. It's the same thing. But it does have the distinction of term. So again, layer after layer, page after page of minuscule changes. It was said that, Leonardo would come into the studio, kind of run in with high intensity of focus, put like 4 or 5 strokes down, and then leave and not come back for like a week or so. So it was kind of, he would have these bursts of intense focus, and then I got other stuff going on, which he did. Okay, so the first stage that all these different stages share is called the pentimenti, or the drawing, or the pentimentos. This is basically what we would call the dry brush stage. The main purpose of this is to determine the proportion, the size, accuracy of drawing. This is what Italians call the disegno, the design, or the drawing, where you really analyze your composition and all of your other your choices. This is very linear, though. This is, again, not like our understanding of brush or paint where you kind of mass in. They are still thinking of lines. So modeling in this is hatching, not massing in. So again, not a modern, yeah.
So is this watercolor you said in ink normally?
So in Leonardo and Raphael and in Van Eyck and Northerners, it is watercolor. For Titian, and this is what makes him kind of that next step up, it's oil. Yeah. And so I have free-forming here. That's a half-truth. Van Eyck is not a ad-libber. It does not do anything outside of a cartoon. Raphael sometimes does make changes, but Titian is a free-forming painter. He is making changes on the fly, and it is the first time where a painter is doing something that we might recognize as more modern studio practice, where he is changing the composition as it forms. He's not wed to this idea where I've drawn everything, now I'm just coloring it in type of situation. And it was usually done in one single earth tone, which probably that's kind of makes perfect sense, just a singular dark earth tone to minimize any complications as far as modeling is concerned. So Titian's underpainting, though, are deserving of a few different distinctions here. So first of all, underpaintings are opaque by definition. They are just a fully opaque subject. So usually monochromatic, again, this kind of should harken back to Raphael's process, where after the initial local colors are laid in, he models with that color plus white, very similar. But Titian's paintings are lighter in value than his end goals are, which are a little different than his other than the other painters at this time, because he's going to be glazing subsequently. And his underpaintings tend to be pretty comprehensive at times too. His imprimaturas are actually white or just off-white because he wants to have the advantage of using a dark pigment, so you get a dark value but a warm translucency because of the transparency. And that's only achievable if you have a light or white imprimatura. So Titian, actually, like Velasquez, which we'll get into later, favored white imprimaturas, which is strange, but very common. So the mediums or the magic sauces of this time period, really nothing out of the ordinary. There's no magic kind of bullet. There's no magic kind of medium here. So what we have is heated bodied oil or a linseed oil that heat has been applied to. Basically what we would call today stand oil. You could also say sun-thickened linseed oil would also be appropriate, very similar. Walnut oil, Italians, Titian especially, loved walnut oil. It's a slower drying oil, so if you're in a warmer climate, it keeps your window of working open for a longer time, so it's a more advantage to use that. It yellows less as well. Ground glass. So ground glass is not kind of what it sounds like. When there's a car accident and a windshield gets shattered and there are these shards, it is a glass that is, it's a powder. It is glass, but it is pulverized into a powder, and it creates an iridescent quality. It is also helps expedite what is called the polymerization of oil painting, so it actually helps in some ways that way. It is all over Raphael's paintings. It is in early layers, it is in later layers, it's all over the place. And sap resin or varnish is found sparingly, but it is found in some places, like if you think back to the ambassador portrait of the two men with the green background, that green fabric has a resinous medium in it to help hold its intensity of glazing, I think. So, and so here I just want to walk through some visualizations of some of the processes that I've just talked about. So this is again the Madonna of the Baldacchino. This is by Raphael and it is left unfinished. And to us, that's a huge resource here. But so this is by a contemporary, and so you can see here the line work. This is the pentimenti. This is the transfer that has been reinforced with brush and ink or brush and watercolor. You can see that this is a gold imprimatura, and you can see the beginnings of the modeling of flesh. So like I was saying with Raphael, the first layer of skin is a neutral orange, red and yellow, and white. That is exactly what that is. It is a basic flesh tone of yellow ochre and vermilion plus white to model the lights of the form. The darks that you're seeing are a burnt lake, or basically a transparent brown, essentially. Then you're seeing that being built up over time here. So this idea of cartoon and transfer. So here we have St. Catherine again that we looked at earlier, where Da Vinci, Raphael is actually modeling this over off of a Da Vinci drawing. Here we have the cartoon, and you can see how exact. The only thing that changes, funnily enough, is the portrait. So he does change her face. He makes her look upward and her eyes are gazing in a slightly different direction. But he does change that in the pentimenti stage. So he changes that with line. It's almost so he's basically kind of like redrawing it with line work as opposed to like correcting it with modeling. So here he is again. This is a beautiful drawing of a young man, an older man. This is actually used for the Transfiguration painting that we saw earlier that was exhibited with, well, his corpse. So here you can see evidence of the pouncing technique. Do you see these dotted lines that are going across the fabric here? That is the transfer. So that would be what, if this were a panel, the artist would be using a brush and going over that to re-emphasize and reinforce those construct lines. You can see that over here. This is where the thumb was originally going to be transferred over here. And you can see some of the wisps of hair that weren't fully utilized. So some of the transfer just didn't come to fruition and he changed his mind. And that's a study for these two folks. So you can see these two men in the center. This is the cartoon for those two individuals. This is the model. What's really interesting is how naturalistic these are. This young man on the left-hand side feels completely convincing and very modern. But when we look at the final result, there's a certain kind of erudite, kind of like certain kind of classicalness to him. So you can see that these cartoons are references. These are not something he's, again, loyally recording everything. It's a reference to play off of, essentially. So after the transfer, this would have been cemented and rendered with hatching. And these are two demonstrations of rendering with hatching in pen and ink or in watercolor. This is Hercules and the Hydra on the left-hand side by Raphael. And of course, the drawing, again, a copy of the Mona Lisa by Raphael on the right-hand side as well. But this is what the imprimatura would have been placed over, would have been something that looked very much like these drawings here. Now, because Leonardo was quite literally a Renaissance man and had his hands in many pies, was an inventor, mathematician, all this stuff, he didn't finish a lot of paintings. And so for us, that's great because it allows us to kind of understand the process. So here, a great shot. You can see so much of the inner workings of the process. So you can see the pentimenti, the transfer that's been reinforced with the brush and the line. You can see that this is the ochre layer, the yellow ochre layer that I was talking about that Da Vinci would put over it, a little bit of white being worked into it, and a little bit of the brown to work that as well. So we can see the process at work here, and even in this unfinished state, the idea is almost fully realized in a way. It's like I understand everything that's going on there. So here again is a clear depiction of the pentimenti. So all these lines that you're seeing would have been the lines of the drawing. So a very careful and very linearly centric drawing. Again, nothing that has to do with volume at all. These are all very carefully prescribed lines that Da Vinci is modeling, drawing. So, and then from his adoration of the Magi, so all of this is the pentimenti. This is all of that transfer that has been reinforced with a brush and ink. You can see again this yellow ochre layer and the chiaroscuro that's starting to be worked on the Christ child. You can see this already quite volumetric child taking place. But basically the whole painting would have looked like the Madonna here, a linear, sharp outline where everything is kind of described. I mean, honestly, that would be like a dream to paint on because it's like everything is there and it's kind of locked in. So it's kind of, you know, I can understand why that process was so popular. Again, the Madonna showing you the pentimenti here. And so again, this is Raphael's Madonna of the Baldacchino. You can see that these cherubs have maybe 2 layers on them. You can see that they have a little bit of a burnt umber or a burnt lake with boiled linseed oil for the darker halftone shadows, and a little bit of this neutral orange with white, but that's about it. You can see the rest of these are transfer lines. This is all the pentimenti, all of this. All of that's coming through. That would basically be like your transfer showing through in your cast painting, essentially. So this is also, I included this just because this is like, if you do any research on any Van Eyck especially, this image always pops up. And again, this is another St. Catherine, which is which determined by the palm. This is a drawing by Van Eyck, but the color is not Van Eyck. We don't know why, but these colors were added by a later hand. These are watercolors. There's really no clear idea why that was done. There was no efforts to model anything beyond it. But this does give you a sense of what a drawing by Van Eyck in which would have looked like. Incredibly meticulous is putting it lightly. I mean, that's quite incredible. Okay, so now this is an unfinished Dürer that is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I've seen this in person, and this is where we'll see the imprimatura over the hatched transfer. Okay, do you see that now? So like all of this is the drawing, this cross hatching that you see here. And I don't know if it comes across, but there's a slight bluish haze to it. That is this milky layer of white that's floating above the drawing that we're seeing there. We can see the beginnings of him working the hair. You can see him putting in this very thin layer of brown. And what's great about this layering is this thin transparent layer of brown, like the hair just shows right through. So he still has all of his mapping. He still has all of the information, none of it's lost. So on the hand, you could see it better. So you can see the hatching on the hand, and again, this milky gray, the lead white imprimatur that is over this hatching modeling. On the right-hand side, you can see also the different stages of development, where you can see, again, some of the hatching coming through. You can see some of this is getting some very serious attention, whereas some of it is also just like first layer, that dead color layer that we've been talking about. And this is where this is the Adoration of the Magi as it stands today. You can see this milkiness. This is again the imprimatura over the drawing. This is the burnt, well, I'm going to call it burnt umber. This is the burnt lake that is over all of the darker halftones as he was working this. This is actually an enormous painting too. I did not have any idea how big this was until I was doing some research. It is actually a very big painting. So this is, again, kind of creation in action. And these are details of a head study here. This, again, shows you the modeling of the white into that yellow ochre glaze. And you can see already how much finesse and already how much subtlety and nuance there is, even in this foundational layer by Da Vinci. I mean, just, you know. So with Raphael and painting flesh tones, as you see this beautiful portrait on the left-hand side here, again, somewhat a very formulaic approach. Initial layer of orange with white to model forms, and then second and third layers of semi-transparent layers. Black glazes and burnt umbers would actually go to darken things as well. So again, similar to Da Vinci, but much more short. Like not 30 layers, more like 3 to 4. So much more tangible. But that's not to say that these do not have, some of these paintings don't have numerous layers on top of that. Here again, you can see the pentimenti with a little bit of the flesh color on top of that. And again, on the Christ child's head, you can see that building up of form. And so just glazing, just for terminology, it's a pigment that is suspended in oil, but also it's darker than the layer that's going on it. It optically blends, which is what I'm trying to demonstrate in here. So this is how Titian would have achieved his purples, a pink underpainting with then a blue glaze over it, and you can see it actively is turning purple. So that gets you a richer iridescent purple than just opaque painting will allow for. And this painting, La Schiavona, I think that's how that is said, is wearing purple, and there's evidence of Titian doing a pink underpainting, a blue glaze, modeling again in blue, and then glazing with alizarin yet again. So this sandwiching to give you this rich, intense purple that, again, opaque painting just won't give you. And with it's a little hard to see, but you can see a little bit of this ultramarine blue modeling that's coming through as paint becomes more transparent over time. So I was trying to, again, another demonstration like the sleeve. This is of Joseph's purple robe in the Fleeing into Egypt by Titian. And so here I am using alizarin crimson and white, glazing with ultramarine blue, and then modeling with ultramarine blue. This turned out to be a failed experiment. I glazed over that. I did not key lighter like Titian, like his process demands. So when I glazed, it went so dark. You couldn't really see much. But that's pretty much everything that I have prepared. I know I threw a lot at you. Does anybody have any questions or anything that you would like to throw out there? Yeah.
So the whole concept of second painting that we're taught.
Yes,
How
yes.
does that relate to?
So basically second painting, I guess you could say, starts a lot earlier in some of these methods, because you would be applying paint very much like drawing. You'd be applying oil in a hatching way, and then you'd be taking a soft brush and blending that out and rinsing and repeating until you've reached the desired effect. So the second painting that we implement would have been utilized much earlier, but it would have made more sense with all the other adjustments in the process as well. Yeah, so tricky.
Does it derive from glazing? And glazing, you're getting a whole different color altogether,
Yeah.
but you're using that
So-
oil later.
So second painting really comes from Harold Speed. When he talks about painting, he talks about taking up a first painting and a second painting. And he says that he says that to take up a second painting, it is best if you scumble a layer of pure color over an area before working it, because it forces you to take up the whole thing instead of just putting around little details. That's effectively a glaze. What he is saying is you should put a glaze down over an area because it forces you to rework the whole thing. So it's that is kind of where that comes from, but it's not from. So it's more of a 19th century invention essentially than it is a Renaissanceian invention, I guess. Yeah.
Where they do the hatching instead of just like hitting a valley, is like to get more information in there and the drawing.
Hatching is a carryover from egg tempera. That's how you would render an egg tempera, is with hatching. You would like layer like hatching of different values. Sometimes you would float a thin glaze made with water because of egg tempera over that, and that would unify things and blend them. So it's a carryover from that. The linear thinking versus spatial thinking is something we'll be talking about in the next lecture actually. Which starts off with Caravaggio, which is always fun. Any other questions or anything else that anybody had any concerns? Any other thoughts on?
So
Yeah.
I was wondering, some of these innovations that, you could even see back in the 14th century, how much they were just people experimenting.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. It's a lot of it is kind of is that, and a lot of it is also it's a craft first, and you're building an image created by linseed oil on a panel. How do we do that successfully? More so than I'm expressing myself, and what does the oil say about my soul and all this like that. So it's actually very technical, and I think that's why. So let's when it comes to old master techniques, honestly, if you're pragmatic in thinking, you'll get the answer, because they were. It's a very practical, what's the easiest way to get from point A to B, essentially. Most of the time, not all the time.
Yeah, they had a pretty intense scientific outlook on what the plan of putting pigment in linseed oil.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy for not having a microscope.
Yeah, no, it is crazy. There was a British painter his name is escaping me, but I loved his origin story. He has a great hero origin story. He decided to become an oil painter when he met Native Americans, and they showed him how to paint by mixing mud and pigment together. And he was so amazed by that, he learned to oil paint. And I was like, that's an amazing origin story. I love that. Anything else? Any other questions or anything? Yes.
I mean, From all like the techniques that we talked about today,
Yeah.
like as someone painting like now, like
Mhm.
what do you think is like key takeaway or like most valuable to like just be thinking about?
Mhm.
I mean, in the program here.
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
just,
no,
like,
no,
in the
yeah,
studio,
yeah.
like, what's the most?
Be
Uh,
comfortable experimenting.
I would also say how much drawing is paramount. Like drawing in value. So basically the first forms of oil painting are you draw things accurately, you model them monochromatically, and then you colorize that on top, essentially. So I think what I would say one of the heart of what I would take away would be I think that that value is really I mean I feel like I'm saying the same thing all the time. It's just like value and drawing are the most important thing, but I feel like I say that on a daily basis. But I think that really what I would say also is that you can treat painting like drawing, and it also works, and that's what they prove. I think often we think of treating drawing like painting, but maybe not the opposite. And I think that is very much what they are doing. Is that so? Drawing and painting are similar as much as they are different.
Well, thank you, Garrett.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you, guys.